morning, students. Today we are going to start with economics. Class 12 has two textbooks. One is Macroeconomics. So let's begin by the basic concepts of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics, as the name suggests, means economics which deals with the study of large aggregates of the economy level. What do we understand by the large aggregates? Let's discuss. Macroeconomics, as the term, was coined by Ragnar Fries in 1933. He, at that time, coined the term when the economy was suffering from Great Depression. The Great Depression of 1929 to 1933 resulted in the magnum opus textbook of John Maynard Keynes. In 1936, he wrote an invaluable textbook on economics, that is, the General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. In this textbook, he made a new system which was quite contrary to the classical economists led by the father of economics, Adam Smith. Adam Smith, as you very well know, written the first textbook of economics. Previously, prior to him, political economics was the name of economics, and the physiocrats and mercantilists were the French writers or businessmen used to write stray writings of their success stories of trade. So all the theory of economics that originated at the time of Adam Smith. Adam Smith was the firm believer of the belief that laissez-faire economy works well. When the individual economic units at the micro level, they work towards their self-interest, they make decisions for their own selfish interest, the bigger interest of the nation is also fulfilled. So, here the macroeconomics, which originated at that time, was of the belief that the system at a large, that means at the economy level, cannot itself correct. There needs to be certain agency. The government must intervene. And so, with Keynes, there ended the era of laissez-faire economy. His postulate was based on the fact that fiscal policy is very effective, that government must intervene, that the government must start a mass scale, widespread employment programs, and through that the economy can be brought back from the depression. The deficient demand condition could only be get rid of by this method, and definitely he was successful. So, we are going to deal with macroeconomics. Now, what is so much different about macroeconomics? In macroeconomics, we deal differently rather than the microeconomics. In microeconomics, what we deal with is about the independent individual economic units. These economic units may be the consumer who works for his own self-interest or self-motive, and his self-interest is to have greater or maximum of satisfaction or utility. Similarly, another individual economic unit is the producer. The producer tries to maximize profits by keeping the cost minimum and profits maximum. The third economic unit may be the resource owner. So, in brief, Microeconomics, whereas deals with the individual economic units, macroeconomics does not deal with individuals. It is based on the principle of sum total or aggregates. We generally notice that if one commodity is having a price rise, others would also follow. For example, if agriculture commodities in case of inflation is going towards the rise, then also the case for industrial goods and their subparts or subcomponents or various other different varieties in the industrial goods also behave similarly. There may be one or two exceptions, but if we see the general trend, that is applicable for all. So that means a representative imaginary good could be thought about rather than the complex world of millions of goods and commodities and services. So, looking towards that generalization or simplification, we can work well in a simple way to study the economy as a whole rather than to be lost in the woods. So, from the larger point of view, we do not deal with the employment of a resource. Rather, we deal with the general employment level, the level of employment in an economy. That means full employment or unemployment at the economy level. Similarly, we do not deal with the individual price of a good, we deal with the general price level. Then we do not deal with the output of a commodity, nor we deal with the output of an industry, which are the microeconomics topics. We deal with the topic of macroeconomics. So, the students, here the aggregates are of a bigger or wider perspective as compared to the individual economic variables. Similarly, we can take the output level of a factory or industry of a good. That is the topic of microeconomics. But in macroeconomics, we do not deal with that. We deal with the total output production of an economy. Similarly, we are not interested in the income of a resource owner or a consumer household, but income of all the families taken together. That means the national income. So, the economic units rather than the individual economic units, as in the microeconomics, we deal with the macroeconomic units. Then we are simplifying through the general trend or aggregate trend. Then sometimes we also deal with the sector level, sub-economy level. That means rather than the economy as a whole, we deal with various sectors, agriculture sector, industrial sector, government sector. You know why? Because their interrelationships sometimes give an insight into the macroeconomics. So, in order to gain a better picture of the working, and sometimes due to the different technologies, different nature of production and different other factors, we study them at the sector level. So, this way, in macroeconomics, we are dealing with the subsectors. So, we do not go lower than this level. So, till the industry level, from the micro level, from the individual level, there is microeconomics, which is dealing with microeconomic analysis, but in the macroeconomics, we deal with the economy level or the sector level, or sometimes the subsector level, in order to get a better insight of the various sectors and their growth rates or the nature of the problems that originate there. Besides, the nature of microeconomic and macroeconomics also differ in case of the various nature of problems. While in economics there is a unanimity among them. The theory is of more or less of positive nature. They deal with the comparative statics. That means they compare one equilibrium situation with the other equilibrium situation. But in macroeconomics, we deal with the dynamics. We also are interested in the process of one equilibrium, how it leads to another and the third and so on. So the process is also important. Similarly, whereas microeconomics deals with the partial equilibrium approach, that means ceteris paribus, other factors remaining constant. Here in macroeconomics, we deal with the factors influencing each other, because that matters. If one factor is influencing another leading to the third one and so on, all these needs to be studied simultaneously. That's why we do the generalization and simplification in case of macroeconomics. So besides these, we are more or less dealing with the positive economics in case of microeconomics. That means what it should be. That is the theory part. But in macroeconomics, we are dealing with the normative economics. That is what it should be, what it ought to be. So there are policy prescriptions. So just like we say that a application of theory is more or less of interest of macroeconomics rather than microeconomics, whereas microeconomics more or less are dealing with the theory part, how the individual units will decide and behave, or how their equilibrium will be established. Similarly, whereas determination of the price is a subject of microeconomics, determination of income is a subject of macroeconomics. That's why microeconomics is sometimes called as the price theory, whereas macroeconomics is called income theory. The tools are different. In case of microeconomics, we deal with the supply and demand tools, which interaction of which leads to the microeconomic equilibrium or determination of price as well as output, equilibrium price and equilibrium output simultaneously. Whereas in case of macroeconomics, we deal with the tools like aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Aggregate supply of labor, aggregate supply of goods originated from the employment of labor, and the aggregate demand that originates in the various sectors of the economy. So intersection of or interaction of these two aggregate demand tools leads to equilibrium level of the economy, which determines the equilibrium national income. Now, besides the difference in approaches in the micro and macroeconomic equilibrium analysis, there is also somewhat differences in micro and macro approaches. Whereas in microeconomics, we do not frequently start from the problems. But here in macroeconomics, generally disequilibrium is of great interest. Inflation and depression are also very important topics. So that means economic stabilization is a very important topic. Besides, the growth, the fiscal policy, the monetary policy are its various components. We notice that in case of macroeconomics, we deal with the factors in the larger interest of all, which deals with the welfare of the society at large. That means even the economic units at the macro level, they are big, large. For example, the government, the monetary institution like the RBI, Reserve Bank of India in case of India, or the SEBI, So these institutions are either statutory, that means they have been established by law, or have been conferred the role by the government. So they work under these role, under these laws or the framework of laws in order to ensure the welfare of the masses rather than their private profit motive. Thus, the economic motive in micro and macroeconomic analysis differs. It is sometimes noticed that what is applicable at micro level is not applicable at the macro level. For example, in case of microeconomics, we say that if a consumer individually saves larger portion of the income, he can invest that for future and can get interest. So in that case, his income in future will increase. So he will be better off. His welfare will increase. A few may do similarly, but if by and large everybody behaves like that, the economy will not be able to increase. Rather, due to the decrease in consumption, the income will decrease. This is paradox of thrift. So that means whatever is applicable at the micro level does not lead to the macro level. We cannot study with the same tools of microeconomics at the macro level. That is why the need for a separate macroeconomic theory. The Great Depression of 1929 to 33 and the magnum opus book of John Maynard Keynes, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money in case of 1936, has proved beyond doubt that macroeconomics is of great interest for all economies of the world. So previously, the classicals used to study microeconomics. Much more interest was there since they believed that the general equilibrium at the macro level will be automatically achieved. That there will be an invisible hand, that everybody will pursue their selfish motives at the individual level and the general welfare of the masses will be achieved. But that was fallacious, and that's why we are nowadays more interested in the macroeconomics. So now we are at the end of this lecture session, and in this session there are certain important things that arise. Could we say that microeconomics and macroeconomics have nothing in common? No. Macroeconomics is the basis of microeconomics. Similarly, microeconomics deals with certain large aggregates as constants or parameters. So certainly they are dealing with each other, and their tools may differ, but they should be looked upon as complementary to each other. Recent decade, say around 20-25 years, economists are trying to merge micro and macroeconomics. They are trying to bring the two together, just as the trend in case of physics, where micro and macro level physics has been united. So it's a welcome trend, although there's much more to be done. So now there are certain questions that arise after this analysis. Could we answer the following questions? What is macroeconomics? How macroeconomics differs from microeconomics? How we are able to achieve the simplification in case of macroeconomics? And what basically is the significance and importance of macroeconomics for the welfare of the masses? Thank you one and all. Let's join again in the next lecture session.